Welcome, everyone. The May 16th, 2023 Special Council meeting is called to order at 5 o'clock. Council would like to acknowledge the Ucluelethat on whose traditional territories the District of Ucluelet operates. Audience members and public hearing participants are advised that this proceeding is being video recorded and broadcast on YouTube and Zoom, which may store data on foreign servers. Does everyone have the late agenda? I would move that the May 16th, 2023 Special Council meeting agenda be amended by adding late item 1.1, applicant letter 1341 Eber Road, temporary use permit 23-08 to report item 6.2, temporary use permit 23-08, 1341 Eber Road, application number 23-08, as well as the second late item, 1.2, public input, temporary use permit 23-04, 250 Main Street, to report item 6.5, temporary use permit 23-04, 250 Main Street, application number TUP 23-04, and the third late item is 1.3, public input, temporary use permit 22-10, 1295 Eber Road, to report item 6.3, temporary use permit 22-10, 1295 Eber Road, application number TUP 22-10. Could I get a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare, any further discussion? All in favor? And that carries. Thank you. May I have a motion to approve the agenda as amended? Councillor Mafty?
Second.
Councillor Kennington? All in favor? And that carries. We will now conduct 3 individual public hearings. During these hearings, Council will receive public input on District of Ucluelet Zoning Amendment Bylaws number 1326, 1327, and 1328, 2023. This is not the time to provide public input on the temporary use permits. That will come later. There will be an opportunity to comment on the 5 proposed temporary use permits later on tonight's agenda. As provided for in the Local Government Act, Council is required to hold a public hearing before adopting a zoning bylaw, an official community plan bylaw, or amendments thereto. This evening there will be 3 individual hearings. At the conclusion of each, the hearing will be closed. Once the public hearing is closed, Council cannot accept further communications or presentations from the applicant or public respecting the proposed bylaw unless Council decides to hold an additional public hearing. Please note there will be no decisions made during these hearings, and Council is under no obligation to enter into debate on any issue. The purpose is to hear from the public before third reading of each bylaw. Council may consider amending the proposed bylaws based on the public input received at the public hearings. At a public hearing, all persons who deem their interest in property affected by the proposed bylaw will be given an opportunity to be heard or to present written submissions on matters contained in the bylaw. However, all who speak must restrict their comments to the subject bylaw, and it is my responsibility to ensure that all remarks are so restricted. You will have 5 minutes to address Council for the first time. The clerk will advise you at 4 minutes and when your time is up. After everyone has spoken once, those wishing to speak again will have an opportunity. After hearing submissions from members of the public, Council may ask questions to clarify what has been said. However, this is not a Q&A session or a town hall meeting. To maintain an atmosphere that is respectful of all points of view, it is important for the audience to refrain from applauding or cheering for speakers. Today, applicants and members of the public can participate in person or electronically. All speakers must state their name and address.
The subject zoning amendment bylaws and related materials, the District of Ucluelet zoning bylaw, and the District of Ucluelet official community plan are available for review at my desk and on the district's website. The public may participate in this hearing in person, by phone, or by Zoom, or by email to communityinput@ucluelet.ca. To speak in person, raise your hand when the mayor calls for in-person speakers. Speak from the mic when it's your turn. That's because we're also on Zoom today. To speak by Zoom, click the raise your hand icon when the mayor calls for speakers via Zoom. When it's your turn, you will be called on by your Zoom name, so please ensure your Zoom name is your first and last name. To speak by phone, press star 9 when the mayor calls for speakers calling in. When it's your turn, you'll be called on by the last 3 digits of your phone number. Press star 6 to unmute yourself. Any unpublished emails about the bylaws received at communityinput@ucluelet.ca before the end of each public hearing will be read into the record. Please put the application number in the subject line of the email and keep your emails short. For further details about how to participate by Zoom, telephone, or email, please visit ucluelet.ca.
Thank you, Mr. Rotenberg. We'll now move on to item 4.1, which is our first public hearing this evening. I now declare the public hearing for District of Ucluelet Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 1327-2023 open. This zoning amendment bylaw relates to the property at 2108 Peninsula Road. The application number is RZ22-08. The planning assistant, Monica Whitney Brown, will now provide a brief overview of the bylaw. After she speaks, the applicant will have an opportunity to speak, and then I will call for public input. Ms. Whitney Brown.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So before I begin presenting the items on today's public hearing agenda, I'll just note again, there is a copy of the District of Ucluelet zoning bylaw and official community plan, both available at the desk of the Manager of Corporate Services, should anyone wish to review them for reference. Public notice as well for this public hearing has been given for all 3 rezoning applications according to Section 464 and 456 of the Local Government Act. So first, we have bylaw number 1327. In general terms, the purpose of the District of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1327-2023 is to amend the District of Ucluelet zoning bylaw number 1160-2013 by changing the zoning designation of the property at 2108 Peninsula Road from CD1 industrial to CD1 industrial residential, removing some industrial uses and permitting secondary suite and tourist accommodation suite as secondary uses on the subject property. Next slide, please. So you can see there the zoning map which accompanies the bylaw change. Next slide, please. For greater clarity, the current and proposed uses under the zoning bylaw are shown on the screen in front of you. The applicant is proposing to remove many of the more intensive industrial uses which from the current zoning, which might not be appropriate for this fairly unique site, and expand the secondary uses to increase potential residential uses and allow a tourist accommodation suite. With that, I'll just defer it back to the mayor.
Thank you. Does council have any questions for staff? This is an opportunity for the applicant to present, if he so wishes. No, that's fine. Thank you for being here. This is the first call for speakers. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to address this bylaw? Please raise your hand. I'll call on you when it's your turn. Seeing none, are there any members of the public attending by Zoom that wish to speak? Click the raise your hand icon. Are there any speakers on Zoom?
There are no hands raised at this time.
And are there any speakers calling in? Press star 9 if you wish to speak.
No callers at this time.
And have we received any unpublished emails about the bylaw to communityinput@ucluelet.ca?
We do not have any emails to community input at ucluelet.ca on this bylaw at this time.
Thank you. Does council have any questions for staff? Seeing none, I'll do a second call for speakers. There's 3 calls altogether. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak to bylaw number 1327, 2023? Seeing none. Mr. Rotenberg, are there any speakers on Zoom?
Click the raise your hand icon if you'd like to speak. No hands are raised at this time.
And are there any speakers calling in?
We do not have any speakers calling in at this point.
And have we received any emails?
Just updating the folder. We have not received any further emails on this bylaw at this time.
All right, I'll do the third call for speakers. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak to this bylaw? Seeing none, are there any speakers on Zoom?
Click the raise your hand icon if you'd like to speak to this bylaw. No hands are raised at this time.
And are there any speakers calling in?
No, there are no speakers calling in at this time.
And have we received any emails on the bylaw to community input?
None on this bylaw.
Thank you. I now declare public hearing for District of Ucluelet Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 1327, 2023 closed at 5:12 p.m. Thank you. You don't have to stay if you don't want to. And I believe Councillor Kennington is recusing himself from this one.
This is the
1326.
yes. I have to recuse myself because I have a development permit or I was the consultant on a development permit, which would benefit from one decision or the other. So I will recuse myself.
Thank you. I now declare the public hearing for District of Ucluelet Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 1326, 2023 open. This zoning amendment bylaw relates to the addition of daycare center use to the CS2 zone and a cleanup of section 403. The application number is RZ23-03. Our municipal planner, Mr. John Toogood, will now provide a brief overview of the bylaw. After Mr. Toogood presents, I will call for public input. Welcome.
Thanks. In general terms, the purpose of District of Ucluelet Zoning Amendment Bylaw 1326-2023 is to amend the District of Ucluelet Zoning Bylaw 1160-2013 in 2 ways. First, modify section 403.2 to remove a restrictive clause that currently prohibits a secondary suite from coexisting in a house which also operates as an accessory bed and breakfast use. This would remove an inconsistency with amendments to the zoning bylaw that were adopted last year. And second, it would add daycare center as a permitted use in CS2 service commercial zone. So this bylaw is a bit of a cleanup bylaw. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Toogood. Mostly housekeeping items, correct? Does council have any questions for staff? All right, thank you. This is the first call for speakers. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak about this bylaw? Please raise your hand. I'll call on you when it's your turn. Seeing none, are there any members of the public attending by Zoom that wish to speak? Click the raise your hand icon.
No hands are raised at this time.
And are there any speakers calling in? Press star 9 if you wish to speak.
No hands are raised at this time.
And have we received any unpublished emails about the bylaw to community input?
Not at this time.
All right. Second call for speakers. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak to bylaw number 1326, 2023? Seeing none, are there any speakers on Zoom?
No hands are raised at this time.
And are there any speakers calling in?
None at this time.
Have we received any additional emails?
Not at this time.
So this is the third call for speakers. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak on this bylaw? Seeing none, are there any speakers on Zoom?
No hands are raised at this time.
Are there any speakers calling in?
None at this time.
And have we received any emails on the bylaw to community input?
Not at this time.
I now declare public hearing for District of Ucluelet Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 1326, 2023 closed at 5:17 p.m. I believe Councillor Kennington is recusing himself from this next item as well. For 4.3. This is zoning amendment bylaw number 1328. Could someone check with Councillor Kennington, please? This is the Holly Crescent one. So I'm just double checking. Yeah. Great. I now declare the public hearing for District of Ucluelet Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 1328, 2023 open. This zoning amendment bylaw relates to the property at 1633 Holly Crescent. The application number is RZ23-02. Please note that public input on the temporary use permit for vacation rental use at this property will be received later this evening under agenda item 6.1. Our planning assistant, Monica Whitney Brown, will now provide a brief overview of the bylaw. After she presents, the applicant will have an opportunity to speak, and then I will call for input from members of the public. Welcome back, Ms. Whitney Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mayor. In general terms, the purpose of District of Ucluelet Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 1328, 2023 is to amend the District of Ucluelet Zoning Bylaw number 1160, 2013 by changing the zoning designation of the property at 1633 Holly Crescent from R1 single-family residential to R2 medium-density residential, allowing one secondary suite in each duplex unit as a secondary use. Next slide, please. You can see the subject property location here on the zoning map noted in red, as well as the graphic of the proposed use changes. And once again, I'll just reiterate for council and any members of the public that we do have an upcoming temporary use permit application associated with this, and we'll be receiving comments at that time. So any specific input for that can be finished at that time. So with that, I'll just defer it back to the mayor if there's questions.
Thank you. Does council have any questions for staff? Seeing none, this is an opportunity for the applicant to present, if he or she so wishes. Go ahead. Can you go to the mic, please? And just state your name and address, please. One more time.
Veda Siga, 215 Albion Crescent, Millstream. Thank you. This bylaw amendment basically seeks to change the zoning back to what it was originally when I purchased the property. And a zoning process took place that I was unaware of where it was changed to R1. It was originally built as a duplex and was zoned R2. Thank you.
Thank you. Does council have any questions for the applicant? All right, this is the first call for speakers. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak on this bylaw? Please raise your hand. I'll call on you when it's your turn. Seeing none, are there any members of the public attending by Zoom that wish to speak?
Click the raise your hand button if you wish to speak. There are no hands raised at this time.
And are there any speakers calling in? Press star 9 if you wish to speak.
There are no hands raised at this time.
And have we received any unpublished emails about the bylaw to community input?
None at this time.
Thank you. Second call for speakers. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak to bylaw number 1328, 2023? And seeing none, are there any speakers on Zoom?
No hands are raised at this time.
And are there any speakers calling in?
We do not have any speakers calling in at this point.
And have we received any emails?
Updating the folder. We have not.
Okay, this is the third and final call for speakers. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak on this bylaw? Seeing none, are there any speakers on Zoom?
Click the raise your hand icon if you would like to speak. No hands are raised at this time.
And are there any speakers calling in?
None at this time.
And have we received any emails on community input?
We have not.
Thank you. I now declare public hearing for District of Ucluelet Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 1328, 2023 closed at 5:23 p.m. Thank you, and you don't have to stay if you don't want to either. Moving on to bylaws, we will now consider the zoning amendment bylaws. This is an opportunity for council to discuss the bylaws and the public input received at the hearings. The first bylaw item is 5.1, District of Ucluelet Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 1328, 2023, 1633 Holly Crescent. This report will be presented by the planning assistant, Ms. Whitney Brown.
Hello again, Mayor and Council. This temporary use permit is one Council is familiar with, and it is to allow a vacation rental use in a proposed secondary suite at the property at 1633 Holly Crescent for a period of 3 years. The applicant are local residents who intend to operate the secondary suite as a long-term rental housing unit in the future, and they're looking to obtain this temporary use permit to allow them to recoup some of the costs of renovating and adding these additional dwelling units. I apologize. Thank you, Mr. CEO. As council will recall, we just held a public hearing on this matter. At this time, if there are questions for staff relating to this bylaw, I'm happy to help, and otherwise, council can use this time to have their discussion regarding third reading and bylaw adoption.
Thank you, Ms. Whitney Brown. Are there any questions from council to staff? Seeing none, there is a staff recommendation. If the recommended motions are moved, they should be moved separately. Would council like to make a motion?
I will. I will move that council give third reading to District of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1328, 2023.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Councillor Anderson. Any further discussion?
This is part of that clean up the bylaw from 2013. We're going to get very familiar with it.
All in favor? And that carries. There's a second motion here as well.
I will move that council adopt District of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1328, 2023.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Councillor Anderson. Any further discussion? All in favor? And that carries too. Thank you. I believe Councillor Kennington is also sitting out this one. Yes, okay. The next bylaw is item number 5.2, District of Ucluelet Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 1326, 2023, minor amendments, addition of daycare center use to the CS2 zone, and a cleanup of section 403. This report will be presented by Mr. Toogood again. Welcome back.
Hi, Council. As kind of indicated in the public hearing, this is a cleanup bylaw. We found some inconsistencies with some of the recent bylaw changes about B&Bs, and this is just kind of fixing an oversight of this section. We're also looking at adding daycare to the CS2 use. There's upcoming proposals, but in the totality of adding daycare to the CS2 zone, it seems a good thing to do for the community. The bylaw received first and second reading on the 25th of April, public hearing today, and it is now in a position to give third reading and potential adoption to this bylaw.
Thank you, Mr. Toogood. Are there any questions from council to staff? There is a staff recommendation. If the recommended motions are moved, they should be moved separately. Councillor Anderson?
I would move that council give third reading to District of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1326, 2023.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Mafty? Any further discussion? All in favor? And that carries. Thank you. And there is a second motion.
I would also move that council adopt District of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1326, 2023.
I'll second it.
Councillor Hoare, any further discussion?
I just think it's a good thing to make it possible to have daycares in more spaces than we currently have.
Absolutely.
Better to be less restrictive when we're trying to expand that sort of thing.
I'll call the question. All in favor? None opposed, and that carries. Thank you. We need Councillor Kennington back. Thanks. Welcome back.
Thank you.
The last bylaw item is 5.3, District of Ucluelet Zoning Amendment Bylaw number 1327, 2023, 2108 Peninsula Road. This report will be presented by the Planning Assistant, Ms. Whitney Brown. Welcome back.
Bylaw number 1327 has now received first and second reading, and a public hearing was held this evening. And council is now in a position to do third reading and adoption should they wish. I'm happy to answer any questions at this time for staff.
Thank you. Any questions from council? There is a staff recommendation. If the recommended motions are moved, they should be moved separately. Would council like to make a motion?
I'll move that council give third reading to District of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1327, 2023.
Second.
Councillor Kennington seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor? And that carries. And there is a second motion.
I'll move that council adopt District of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1327, 2023.
And I'll second that.
Councillor Mafty and Councillor Anderson. Any further discussion? All in favor? And that carries. Excellent. Moving on to reports. We have 5 report items this evening. They are all related to proposed temporary use permits. After each permit is presented by staff, the applicant and then members of the public will have an opportunity to address council. And the first one is temporary use permit 2307. So Councillor Kennington, I believe you have to recuse yourself again. This is the Holly Crescent.
Out you go.
Getting your exercise this evening.
I was involved in the design of this project, so I have to recuse myself.
Thank you. Yes. The first report item is temporary use permit 23-07, 1633 Holly Crescent. Application number TUP 23-07. This temporary use permit is for the property at 1633 Holly Crescent. Crescent is misspelled in the agenda, apparently. The application number is TUP 23-07. This report will be provided by Ms. Whitney Brown. After the planning assistant presents, the applicant, then members of the public, will have an opportunity to address council. Ms. Whitney Brown.
Hello again, Mayor and Council. At the risk of a touch of deja vu here, I'll be presenting this temporary use permit. It is one council at this point is quite familiar with. It's to allow vacation rental use in a proposed secondary suite at the property at 1633 Holly Crescent for a period of 3 years. The applicants are local residents who intend to operate those secondary suites as long-term rental housing in the future. And they are at this time looking to obtain the temporary use permit to allow them to recoup some of the costs associated with building and renovating those new dwellings. The applicants have included a letter of intent for council, which is in the agenda before you on page 95. The conditions of the temporary use permit include additional residency and response requirements. As council is quite familiar with this application, I think I'll just leave it there and see if there's any questions for staff, and the applicants, as we know, are here and should be given a chance to speak, as well as any other members of the public.
Thank you. Any questions for staff from council? Would the applicant like to speak?
Thank you. Originally, I took out my retirement money so that I would have an opportunity to live in town in my old age, and this is where I'm going with this. Currently, my son lives on the side that's being renovated, and the downstairs is ultimately going to be renovated to my specifications. I have run vacation rental before, and I've also lived next door to non-resident owners who rented as vacation rental, and I just want to express how critical it is to have a local person monitoring or living in the area where they can respond to any problems with vacation rentals. And I certainly recognize that there's a lot of contentiousness around the issue. But thank you for hearing me out, and I hope it'll be adopted.
Any questions for the applicant from council? I am now going to call for public input. I will call for public input twice. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak to the temporary use permit for the property at 1633 Holly Crescent? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, are there any members of the public attending by Zoom that wish to speak? Click the raise your hand icon.
No hands are raised at this time.
And are there any speakers calling in? Press star 9.
We don't have any speakers calling in at this time.
And have we received any unpublished emails to community input?
Not on this matter.
Thank you. Second call for speakers. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak to this temporary use permit? Seeing none, are there any speakers on Zoom?
Click the raise your hand icon to speak. No hands are raised at this time.
And are there any speakers calling in?
No speakers calling in at this time.
And have we received any additional emails?
None at this time.
Thank you. There is a staff recommendation. Would council like to make a motion? Councillor Anderson.
I will move that council authorize the Director of Community Planning to execute and issue temporary use permit 23-07 to allow the applicant to operate a vacation rental use in the secondary suite of a duplex unit at 1633 Holly Crescent for a period of 3 years.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Mafty seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed, and that carries. Great, thank you. Just waiting for Councillor Kennington to come back. Welcome back.
For real?
Yes.
All right.
The next report item is 6.2, Temporary Use Permit 23-08. Temporary Use Permit 23-08, 1341 Eber Road. Application number 23-08. This temporary use permit is for the property at 1341 Eber Road. The application number is TUP 23-08. This report will be presented by our community planner. Mr. Toogood, welcome back.
Thank you. Through the mayor, council first saw this report on its April 25th regular meeting and directed staff to give notice of its intent to consider temporary use permit 2308 to allow fish processing and sales in its in a proposed new 84 square meter new building. And if you could put the next slide up, which is indicated in red on the image on the screen. That this TUPA would be valid for a period of 3 years and would allow the business to expand while broader updates to the marine industrial zones and Ucluelet proceeds. Neptune Ice has been operating on the upland property and within the foreshore of 1341 Eber Road since 1977. The adoption of Ucluelet zoning bylaw 800 back in 1999 designated Neptune Ice as R1 single-family dwelling, along with multiple other marine industrial properties. Neptune Ice plans to provide dock-to-table fish processing, local sales from their location on the wharf. The proposal is consistent with district's policies supporting both diversification and local food security. And I'm here for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Toogood. Any questions from council to staff? Seeing none, would the applicant like to speak? Not necessary. Are there any questions from council to the applicant? I'm now going to call for public input, and I will call for it twice. Are there any members of the public attending in person who would like to address the temporary use permit for the property at 1341 Eber Road? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, are there any members of the public attending by Zoom that wish to speak? Click the raise your hand icon.
No hands are raised at this time.
And are there any speakers calling in? Press star 9.
We do not have any speakers calling in at this time.
And have we received any unpublished emails to community input?
Not on this matter.
Thank you. This is the second call for speakers. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak to this temporary use permit? Seeing none, are there any speakers on Zoom?
Click the raise your hand icon if you would like to speak. No hands are raised at this time.
And are there any speakers calling in?
None at this time.
And have we received any additional emails?
Not on this matter.
Thank you. There is a staff recommendation. Would council like to make a motion?
I am quite happy to move this one because I like the idea of food security and supporting our local economy this way. So I will move that council authorize the Director of Community Planning to execute and issue temporary use permit 23-08 to allow fish processing and sales in a proposed new 84-meter squared building on the Neptune Ice Wharf at 1341 Eber Road for a period of 3 years.
Thank you, Councillor Hoare.
I will second.
Councillor Mafty seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed, and that carries. Excellent. The next report is item 6.3, temporary use permit 22-10, 1295 Eber Road, application number TUP 22-10. This temporary use permit is for the property at 1295 Eber Road. The application number is TUP 22-10. Like the previous report items staff will present, then the applicant will have an opportunity to speak, followed by members of the public. Welcome back, Ms. Whitney Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. This application is for a temporary use permit for the property, as you mentioned, at 1295 Eber Road. You can see on the map there before you on the screen. And the applicant is seeking a temporary use permit to allow a vacation rental use in the secondary suite of the single-family dwelling on site, and to be able to administer this use from a lawful non-conforming duplex located on the same property. Next slide, please. So the report before you goes into the details of the application's background, but briefly, the property is zoned R1, which allows a single-family dwelling on site with secondary uses, including secondary suite and bed and breakfast. The property currently has 4 dwellings on site, and you can sort of see there on the site map, an existing single-family dwelling with an attached secondary suite, plus a lawfully non-conforming duplex built prior to the infamous 1999 zoning amendment, which designated this as R1. The zoning currently permits up to 3 bed and breakfast rooms in the single family dwelling, but is limited in that under the zoning bylaw, that use must be administered by the resident of the single family dwelling. The applicant, who is the owner, currently lives in one half of the duplex on site. And in their case, they had initially applied for a bed and breakfast license and were denied because they aren't the resident of the single family dwelling. So since their initial application, they have clarified their intention for the property and amended their approach to fit their desired use as well as some community needs. Moving forward, the applicant is seeking to rent out the secondary suite as a short-term rental via temporary use permit. They currently have a long-term tenant who lives in that suite seasonally and is not there in the summer. And the permit would allow the applicant to continue to use the suite as the long-term residential use through the winter. The applicant travels extensively in the winter through work, meaning they wouldn't be able to operate the vacation rental through the winter season as you're not able to operate it if you're not present. In the summer, they hope to rent it out as a vacation rental while their tenant is away on summer vacation. And the flexibility of seeking this use rather than renovating the suite to comply with the B&B requirements as they had initially planned means the applicant can retain the kitchen and easily switch back and forth between long-term residential and short-term rental use without requiring extensive renovations. So granting of this temporary use permit would mean that this particular site had 3 long-term residential units on the subject property, 2 duplex units and the single-family dwelling, plus 1 short-term vacation rental use, which is likely to be seasonal and host a long-term resident through the winter months. And this perhaps represents a more supportable ratio of housing modes compared to residential properties, which can have up to 3 B&B rooms. And the revenue from this use would help the applicant fund some property upgrades. They've also provided a detailed statement of intent in their application, which is in the agenda before you. So at this time, I'm happy to answer any questions from council, and the applicant is also here and should be given an opportunity to speak.
Thank you. Does council have any questions for staff?
No.
Councillor Hoare?
Can you just clarify, so I know that there are requirements for B&Bs in regards to like the kitchen and the laundry, maybe just to clarify what this temporary use permit means. They don't have to do the renos to make those changes, so I'm just for everybody out there.
Through the mayor, yes, so the application is for a temporary use of a vacation rental, which is a slightly different use than a bed and breakfast as defined in our bylaw. And a vacation rental is really the location of a commercial or of a tourist commercial use in a secondary suite. So that means that it can have a full kitchen, be separate, entrance, etc. The bed and breakfast is really limited to at this time now, like rooms within the house, but also to not have cooking facilities beyond, I think, the small fridge, toaster, microwave. So not really suitable for long-term residential use, but we do already have within our zoning bylaw these vacation rental uses. So it's really allowing that use for this 3-year period within the house so that they can just maintain it as a secondary suite.
Thanks for that.
Any other questions for staff? No. Would the applicant like to speak? And just please state your name and address, please.
Robin Van Gene, 1295 E Road. I think Monica kind of just nailed it. I was basically just going to repeat everything that she said there, but really our long-term goals are really to bring that property back up to what it used to be, and to do that we are seeking a little bit of financial help to do that. We as a couple, myself and my partner, we live in the duplex in a 2-bedroom attached to a 1-bedroom, which is also rented long-term. And we've chosen not to live in the single-family dwelling, which is 4 bedrooms. And right now it's occupied by a long-term tenant, and we will continue to have that occupied long-term or rented long-term into the future. So yeah, we would be really, really close to the unit, and as well the adjacent unit next door is also a vacation rental. So, and they have been notified, and they have a letter that they submitted as well. So, yeah, really meeting. Hopefully, we're meeting the goals of the community and some flexible housing options with this TOP.
Thank you. Any questions from council to the applicant? No. I'm now going to call for public input. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak to the temporary use permit for the property at 1295 Eber Road? Please raise your hand. Seeing none, are there any members of the public attending by Zoom that wish to speak? Click the raise your hand icon.
No hands are raised at this time.
And are there any speakers calling in? Press star 9.
We have no speakers calling in.
And have we received any unpublished emails to community input?
The only input we received that's written is published in a late agenda.
Thank you. This is my second call for speakers. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak to this temporary use permit? Are there any speakers on Zoom?
No hands are raised at this time.
And are there any speakers calling in?
We do not have any speakers calling in at this time.
And have we received any additional emails?
None on this matter.
Thank you. There is a staff recommendation. Would council like to make a motion? Councillor Anderson?
I'll move that council authorize the Director of Community Planning to execute and issue temporary use permit 22-10 to allow the applicant to operate a vacation rental use in the secondary suite of the single-family dwelling at 1295 Eber Road for a period of 3 years and administer this use from a lawful non-conforming duplex located on the same property.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Mafty. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed, and that carries. Thank you. The next report item is 6.4, Temporary Use Permit 23-01, 1970 Harbor Crescent. Application number TUP 23-01. This temporary use permit relates to the property at 1970 Harbor Crescent, also known as Trappa. The application number is TUP 23-01. The same approach will be taken with this item as with the previous items. Staff and then the applicant and then members of the public will be given the chance to speak. Ms. Whitney Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. This application is for a temporary use permit at 1970 Harbor Crescent, as mentioned, and it would be to allow a maximum of 18 recreational vehicle units to be used as seasonal employee accommodation for the applicant, Ucluelet Harbor Seafoods. Next slide, please. So I'll briefly address some of the background on this site, which is given in greater detail in the report in front of you. In 2019, the applicant applied for a temporary use permit for the use on site, which had a number of conditions, many of which at that time went unmet. So the TEP was kind of never fulfilled, but the use has been somewhat ongoing since then. In June 2022, the Ucluelet bylaw officer responded to complaints regarding the property and noted a number of unauthorized land uses. And the applicant was provided with a letter outlining all infractions and providing some direction on how to come into compliance. Since that time, the applicant has been working quite diligently with the district to address these concerns, and they've so far implemented a variety of things, including the fencing you see there, some screening and landscaping. They've provided proof of certified installation of water and sewer services, as well as providing a manager's contact information to residents of the Water's Edge property to address any nuisance issues. And they've added signage to ensure that you can see the civic address from the road. And there have been no recorded incidents with the district in terms of bylaw complaints on this site since those changes have been implemented. Part of that letter was also instructions that the applicant must obtain a new and updated temporary use permit. So that's the matter before council at this time. Next slide, please. So the applicant has provided an updated site plan. You can see here the site as proposed does not offer many amenities or particularly high quality conditions for worker accommodations, but it does provide a safe temporary way to allow Ucluelet Harbor Seafoods to accommodate their required staff, many of whom operate on a shift system and live in the RV units and then return home once their shift is done. And it helps UHS to address what we know is a very tight housing crunch experienced by the district at this time. Next slide. So should council approve this application, the site will receive some minor upgrades as outlined in that permit before you, and eventually then would be able to house a maximum of 18 units laid out, as you can see on that site plan, with a maximum of 36 workers able to stay on that site. So The temporary use permit certainly does not sort of present a permanent solution to the staff housing challenges that UHS is experiencing, and the applicant really should be working towards developing and providing long-term and permanent staff housing to accommodate their workforce. In the short term, however, staff feel there is merit in allowing the applicant to provide employee accommodations in accordance with those conditions in front of you, and allow them, as such a large employer in our town, to be able to continue their work, provided that they are working on developing a more comprehensive solution, and the motions before you kind of reflect that. So at this time, I'm available to answer any questions. The applicant is also here and would be happy to answer questions, as well as members of the public who may have input on this should be given a chance to speak.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff from council? Councillor Hoare?
Just clarifying, because these are RV units, so these would be, and there's a limit on how long you can live in an RV unit. So that would apply in this case, the 6 months less a day max amount of time, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right, and that's written into the temporary use permit. In the case of the UHS, they do have quite a lot of turnover within that, so there's sort of less concern about it just being used constantly. Yeah, so they have their turnover, but it's the 6 months less a day that the permit allows.
Any other questions for staff? Councillor Mafti?
I'm just curious about who owns the RVs. Are they all individually owned? Do they belong to workers who bring their own RVs?
Through the mayor, that would be an excellent question for the applicant. I believe would be able to provide some insight.
Thank you. And this might be for the applicant as well, but there is a full-time person sort of monitoring the property there. Is that correct?
That's our understanding, and the contact information, I believe he's actually here to speak to us, but the contact information for that manager was what was provided to Water's Edge for that property to be able to deal with nuisance issues kind of directly, and then also has been provided to the district.
Great, thank you. Would the applicant like to speak? And just state your name and address, please.
Christian Sampson, Workforce Coordinator, Ucluelet Harbor Seafoods at 1310 Helen Road.
Thank you. There were a couple of questions, Councillor Mafti.
Yeah, to address your first question, it's a 50-50. We own half of the trailers and the other half is owned by participants or workers that live out of town, and it's a great advantage for them. We run such long shift, 12-hour shifts, so if they can stay in town after their shift and go home on Friday night and come back on Monday evening, it's much more beneficial than driving home after a 12-hour shift. It's dangerous for them. So that's the big advantage to the park, is they can work their shift as if it's excuse me, as if it's a camp job, and then they go home at the end of the week, and it's much safer for everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then the on-site manager?
Yes, the next question was on-site manager. We do have an on-site manager, Kevin Lee, who lives at the park in one of our trailers, and his contact information is provided to Water's Edge and the city, and also my contact info, which I also live in the city, and I can respond to any emergency or any complaint right away.
When you say you live in the city, you mean Ucluelet, right?
I live in the Ucluelet, exactly.
Okay,
1310
just
Helen.
clarifying.
Yes, exactly.
Had me scared there.
Ooh, we're a city now.
Any other questions for the applicant? No, that's great. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
I suppose I just have one question. The recommendation before us, and as Ms. Whitney Brown mentioned, the conversations that you've had with the district involved a discussion that a long-term solution would be ideal for you, ideal for the district. I'm wondering if you can just give us a bit of perspective on what a long-term solution would look like and where you are towards achieving such a solution.
Yes, perfect. Good question. It's very difficult. Our plan is to purchase both properties that we're currently renting. We have a temporary use permit for, as you know, the Thornton Motel, which we use for our housing our employees as well. and the trappa that we use to offload, and as if we get a approved temporary use permit for the park. So our long-term goal is to purchase both properties. We do also own a property that's in front of the 1661 Cedar Road plant that we are also considering maybe putting housing on that specific piece of land, maybe a portion of the park. And if that's not possible, then something else in the city. If I know we spoke a little bit to if we can trade a piece of land, if the city would want that piece of land, and we get a different piece of land, maybe somewhere outside of the town, we'd be open to that. But right now, that's our current strategy: is purchasing both rental properties that we've been renting now for some time now, and then also moving forward with the property that's right in front of our plant at 1661 Cedar Road Park.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great, thank you for being here. I'm now going to call for public input. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak to the temporary use permit for the property at 1970 Harbor Crescent? Please raise your hand. Yes, Mr. Hanson, just your name and address, please.
Andrew Hanson, 2216 Lake Placid. I just want to say that Christian has been leasing 6 places from us for his staff for probably over a year anyways, and any issues we've had, he's been there right away and dealt with them. Any concerns we've had with the units, he steps in and solves it, and he's been a superstar tenant. Thanks.
Great, thank you for your comments. Any other members of the public attending in person who wish to speak? Seeing none, are there any members of the public attending by Zoom that wish to speak? Please click the raise your hand icon.
We do not have any hands raised at this time.
Thank you. Are there any speakers calling in? Press star 9 if you wish to speak.
We don't have anyone calling in at this time.
And have we received any unpublished emails to communityinput@ucluelet.ca?
Not on this matter.
This is the second and final call for speakers. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak to this temporary use permit? Seeing none, are there any speakers on Zoom?
Click the raise your hand icon if you would like to speak. No hands are raised at this time.
And are there any speakers calling in?
None at this time.
And have we received any additional emails?
We have not.
Thank you. There are 2 staff recommendations. If council moves the recommendations, they can be moved together. Would council like to make a motion?
I'll move that council authorize the Director of Community Planning to execute and issue temporary use permit 23-01 to allow a maximum of 18 recreational vehicle units to be used as seasonal employee accommodation on the property at 1970 Harbor Crescent. And further, that council direct staff to advise Ucluelet Harbor Seafoods of council's desire to see a long-term solution to their worker housing challenges rather than issuing temporary use permits on an ongoing basis.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Councillor Anderson. Any further discussion? Councillor Mafty?
I suppose I would just say that I support the application. I appreciate the challenges. I have a pretty good understanding of what Ucluelet Harbor Seafoods and other employers are up against. I don't see this as a perfect solution, but I'm definitely encouraged by the fact that you have other options that you're actively pursuing. And I think it's one of these issues that as a community we just need to accept the fact that you know, if we want a robust industry and we want workers to work here and, you know, we want operators to create jobs and function, we need to support them however we can, even if it's not an ideal scenario. And so I think the temporary use permit is a good way to go. And I personally feel that, yeah, it would be unfortunate if, you know, 30 years down the road, you're like, we'd love an extension on that temporary use permit. But I don't get the impression that's where you guys are at, so.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed, and that carries. Awesome, thank you. All right, the moment we've all been waiting for. The last report item is 6.5, Temporary Use Permit 23-04 250 Main Street, application number TUP 23-04. The temporary use permit is for 250 Main Street and relates to a cannabis sales use. The application number is 23-04. This report will be presented by Planning Assistant Monica Whitney Brown. After she presents the applicant, and then members of the public will have an opportunity to address council. Welcome back, Mrs. Whitney Brown.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is our final report of the evening. The applicant is seeking a temporary use permit to allow a cannabis sales use in a commercial unit in the Helen Road facing side of the Ucluelet Lodge building. And you can see a map of the location on the screen before you. This TUP would allow the operation of a licensed non-medical cannabis retail store for a period of 3 years. Next slide, please. So council has seen this application before when it was first presented at the regular council meeting on April 25th. I will try to be brief and not repeat information council has already heard, but I'll just reiterate a very brief background to refresh your memory and provide some information to any members of the public who weren't at the last meeting. You can see there the location of the proposed cannabis sales retail unit in red within the Ucluelet Lodge building. When the federal government legalized recreational cannabis use in 2018, municipalities were tasked with updating their zoning bylaws to manage the use. Next slide, please. The Ucluelet zoning bylaw was amended at that time to provide a definition of cannabis sales, which you can see on the screen before you. And section 303.36 of the bylaw was added at that time and prohibits cannabis sales anywhere in the district, meaning that any potential applicants who wish to pursue this use have to seek either a rezoning or a temporary use permit. If this temporary use permit is approved, the applicant would next have to apply for and be granted a provincial license to operate a cannabis retail location. And the use is further regulated by federal legislation, which limits promotions, advertising, cannabis accessories, services, etc. And of course, by the provincial acts, the Provincial Cannabis Control and Licensing Act, which regulate all the licensee requirements, as well as determining who and how to grant those licenses to, compliance, reporting, public consumption, etc. So the applicant in this case is an experienced cannabis retailer with an active license in Port Alberni in operation for 3 years. Next slide, please. So they have provided further details of the training and education that their staff undergo in their letter of intent, which is in your agenda. And the applicant is also proposing some modest landscape and streetscape improvements adjacent to the rear loading area of the property. You can see in this mock-up before you how the commercial unit is expected to look. On the screen there, they got the red box around it. The applicant's decision to apply for a temporary use permit rather than a rezoning in this case may be preferred, as it gives council a chance to set conditions, seek public input, and provide sort of a trial, potentially stage 3-year period for this use without permanently allowing it in the zoning at this stage. With that, I'm available to answer any questions that council may have for staff. The applicant, as we know, is present, should be given a chance to speak, as well as any members of the public who may wish to.
Thank you, Ms. Whitney Brown. Any questions from council? Councillor Hoare.
I'm just curious if notification was sent to our First Nations neighbors, given that just, because of the nature of the permit, it just might be something that they might have wanted to weigh in on, and we didn't get a lot of written correspondence in.
Through the mayor, notice was just given as required under Section 494 of the Local Government Act. So that just included to the public mail out to properties within 100 meters and tenants, and 2 rounds of notification within the Westerly newspaper, as well as some social media correspondence, rather than specifically reaching out to adjacent governments.
Okay, I'm just gonna, just because we operate on the Ucluelet land, that, the unceded territory, I just wanted to voice that thought.
Any other questions for staff?
Through the mayor, who's responsible for enforcing the federal rules?
Through the mayor, I would have to look into the specifics. There is, through Health Canada, there's a complaint. The link was in the agenda in that report before you. If should there be issues of compliance, I'm not sure exactly who is then responsible for the enforcement of it. That those complaints then get reviewed by that federal bureau.
I would expect it would be the RCMP, would it not?
Through the mayor, that would be my assumption, but I would have to look into it to be sure.
It would be nice to know for sure.
Any other questions for staff? All right, would the applicant like to speak? And just your name and address again, please.
Andrew Hansen, 2216 Lake Placid. That last question, because it's a provincial legislation that we're dealing with, if there are any complaints, they go through the province and they go to the LCRB, and then it comes down through the liquor inspector, liquor cannabis inspector. If there's any issues, it goes to them. They report back to us as owners, and if they have concerns, they discuss it with us or send us a letter to say they have concerns. I just want to thank the planning department again for all the time that they put into this, and then thank everybody else that showed up for either supporting it or not supporting us. With regard to the temporary use permit, if we do get it, and if in 3 years there's concerns about our location, concerns about what we're doing, which there won't be, but any of those kind of concerns, we'll reflect back to council at that time when it's a new application for a new permit or a rezoning, and respect council's decision at that time as well. That's about all I got for you right now. If anybody else has anything to say, or if anybody has any questions, I just want to let you know that we're here to sort of solve problems, not create problems, and it's an open door.
Thank you. Any questions for the applicant? No, I think we're good. Thank you. I'm now going to call for public input. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak to the temporary use permit for the property at 250 Main Street? Please raise your hand. We'll start in the front row. Zane? Just your name and address, please.
Hey, I'm Zane Nilsson. I have a business across the street, 1576 Imperial. I also live in Ucluelet, 403 Orca. Being a business owner across the street, I think it would be a very positive aspect to the downtown community. I think Ucluelet really lacks on having a dispensary. I know a lot of people don't come here and go to Tofino because they don't have it. I've always looked up to Andrew. I wouldn't be where I am business-wise without his guidance, and I wouldn't want anyone else to do it.
Thank you. And next.
I think. Jenny Sheeline, 1594 Bay Street. I just am here to support Mr. Hansen's application. I've been to his location in Port Alberni quite a few times. I'm not really knowledgeable about cannabis, but they've been very knowledgeable and very helpful with any questions that I've had. Mr. Hansen's been here for many, many years, and I like how he's done business, and I recommend the temporary use permit. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Jenny. Anyone else in the public that's attending that would like to speak? Yes.
Hello, Dorothy McKee, 1317 Pine Road. I would like to support the temporary use permit. I have worked for the applicant for about 15 years, and I over the years, I've built some relationships with the liquor inspectors, who doubles as the cannabis inspector now since legalization. And through his guidance, we have been able to develop some due diligence policies, internal policies, where we train our staff in what is required for ID, and also duty of care, where we have to ensure that we're not serving intoxicated people, either in the liquor side of the world or in the cannabis side of the world. And we have a process for that all staff are reminded of, and it's discussed on a regular basis and a one-on-one with each staff member quarterly at each location that we have. And to answer a bit more on Ian's question about compliance, we have a federal compliance report where we have to submit once a month, and that includes all our purchases, all our sales, what we're selling it for per gram, so on and so forth. And so they're balancing and checking our inventory on a federal level. On a provincial level, the inspector may come into the store and they go through our registrar, which is any of our receiving invoices, to compare what we have on our shelves to ensure that we're not bringing in any products that aren't from the government, through the Canadian government. So, Mr. Hansen employs a lot of people here in town, a lot of long-term people. He also provides quite a few long-term rentals, as well as rentals to different businesses in town, so that they can have staff to help keep the town running. So I'm 100% in support of it, and I would ask that council supports it as well. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Anyone else attending in person that would like to speak? Yes.
Todd Henry, 1638 Larch Road. I'm here to support Andrew. He's been my boss for 10 years. He knows how to run the business. I'm here to support the temporary use permit as well. I hope that you guys support it as well. I think we need it in this town. We have Tofino delivering to Ucluelet. So I don't understand why we don't just have our own store. And that's what I have to say.
Great, thank you, Todd. Any other people attending in person that would like to speak? Yes.
Shelley Fader, 1318 Helen Road. I was born and raised in Ucluelet, and I have a business here for 22 years, and I just want to say I support Andrew and hope this goes through.
Thank you, Shelley. Anyone else attending in person that wishes to speak? Yes.
Elise Seyford, 1638 Larch Street. I'd just like to say I'd rather see it go to someone who already has, very competently ran a business in distribution of alcohol, and as well as marijuana. I'd far prefer to see that than perhaps these all over telephone poles. I just found one of these today. It's like a dial-a-dealer, basically. I think it'd be a lot nicer to walk into a store where you're feeling safer, where the substance is coming from. I'm not sure if council would like this presented to them or not, as I realized it soon after finding it. I'll
take a look at that.
Yeah. Okay. I'm tempted to try and find a business license for it online, and everything is by donation. So.
Thank you.
And anything further?
Mostly, it would be nice to see it go to someone who's already in control of the distribution.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments. Anyone else attending in person who would like to speak? Okay, seeing none, are there any members of the public attending by Zoom that wish to speak? Click the raise your hand icon.
We have 3 members attending by Zoom, but we do not have any hands raised at this point in time.
All right, are there any speakers calling in? Press star 9 if you wish to speak.
There are no members of the public attending by phone at this time, and no hands raised at this time.
And have we received any unpublished emails to community input?
Yes, bear with me. So we did have one email that was sent in late today, and it's in the late agenda. So that was sent at 10:32 a.m. I'm not going to read that one because it's been published, and we have 2 additional emails that have come in. The first one is from Terry Hunziker. Excuse me for the pronunciation. It reads, "To whom it may concern, I totally approve of a weed store in Ucluelet. Therefore, I feel that the District of Ucluelet should pass the application for one. Yours truly, Terry Hunziker." And I'm going to read the next one. The next email that's come in is from John Harkin. He's included his P.O. Box number, which I won't read here, but it says Ucluelet, BC. And Mr. Harkin reads, "Hi, Council. I support a pot dispensary in town. It's a legal substance and less harmful than alcohol. Please approve the current application and tax the weed sales by at least 5%, and let's use the money for housing or some other social issue." I'm just going to update the folder now. We have not received any further emails at this point in time.
Thank you. This will be my second and final call for speakers. Are there any members of the public attending in person who wish to speak to this temporary use permit? Yes.
I'm Rhonda Innes at 1317 Pine Street, and Andrew has been my boss through a few different businesses for the last 10 years. And
can you speak into the mic, please?
Sorry. I support it not only because he's Andrew, and I think that this business would be ran properly, but because of my own use. I suffer from anxiety and depression, and the edibles help me sleep at nighttime, and then some of the oils and rubs that they have help with muscle and joint aches and pains as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Getting up to speak in public is probably not your first choice. Are there any other members attending in person that wish to speak to this temporary use permit? Yes.
Hi, my name is Kim Foster, and I reside at 215 Alder Street here in Ucluelet. I was born and raised here in Ucluelet, so I understand we're a little bit slower pace there, and we like to take things a little bit slower. I do think that at this point, it is time to grow a little bit, and I think that a cannabis shop is definitely needed here in a community. And I've known Andrew probably for about 15, 16 years now. I don't currently work for him, but some of my really good friends do. And I can see that he is a good employer, but I also know a little bit about the business because I have worked for him in the past. The processes and procedures that are in place when you're dealing with a controlled substance are very rigorous, and the government has put them in place so that we all can be assured that everything is being handled and looked after correctly and keeping everybody safe, users and non-users. Temporary permit is a great way just to see how it will affect the areas within the community and whether or not that is the right place to have it. So I think that definitely this should be going forward, and look at it in 3 years from now and see if there's anything that could be improved. Thank you.
Thanks for your comments, Kim. Anyone else attending in person that would like to speak? Seeing none, are there any speakers on Zoom?
Click the raise your hand icon if you would like to speak. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mayor, but I believe this is will be the last call for Zoom speakers.
Correct, yes.
Okay, click the raise your hand icon if you'd like to speak. There are no hands raised at this time.
And are there any speakers calling in?
We do not have any speakers calling in.
And have we received any additional emails?
Just updating the folder right now. The last email we received was at 5:02 p.m. and it has been read.
Great, thank you. There is a staff recommendation. Would council like to make a motion? Anyone?
I'll move that council direct staff to authorize the Director of Community Planning to execute and issue temporary use permit 23-04 to allow cannabis sales use at 250 Main Street for a period of 3 years.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Councillor Kennington. Further discussion? Councillor Mafty?
Can I ask Mr. Hanson, the applicant, a question at this time? Or is that ship sailed?
I think we'll allow that.
I'm just wondering, Mr. Hanson, I understand you own a number of other properties in Ucluelet, and I'm just wondering how you came to decide that this particular property was the best choice for a cannabis retail outlet.
Andrew Hansen, 2216 Lake Placid. This location was the old officials lounge space that we've been working on for several years to break it down into some retail spaces. The other locations that we own in town aren't really. The last application we put in was for the back of the property at 1786 Peninsula Road, which there was some local feedback that didn't really approve of it. So I think that didn't go forward because of that. I just think that this is a good location because it's central, it's parking, it's not in anybody's face. You can see by the facade that we're doing, it's muted, and yeah. To be honest with you, I don't have another location really. So
that's fine. Yeah, I just wanted
to break it down. Yeah.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other further discussion? Councillor Hoare?
I just don't even know how to couch this. I am concerned that we haven't heard from our neighbors, mainly because it is a controlled substance. I mean, I'm not averse to someone who has experience, but I kind of would like to know what the Ucluelet think about this, because there are some issues with alcohol. There are alcohol issues in our town, as we know, and on the coast, and we don't have a lot of help, mental health help, and support help in the health services for that, and we certainly don't for cannabis use. I'm not against it. I do know there's lots of medical reasons to have it, but I also know that the Ucluelet just had their elections, so they've been pretty distracted. So I would kind of like to send them a little, like, I would, that's the piece of information that I would like to know, if they were supportive or not supportive, or if they had an opinion. They might not, and that would be valid too. But since it sits on their territory, their unceded territory, I just feel like I would like to know what they think.
Any other further discussion?
Coming in here today, I was not, really in support of it for maybe personal reasons, but this isn't a personal issue. This is a community issue. One of the things that sort of tipped me in the other direction was that flyer, because that seems less controlled. And what's to stop, the kids that I'm trying to protect from calling that number? And, who is this person? And are they really checking IDs? And, after hearing the community speak, Andrew seems like the kind of person that is the right person for the job, whether I like it or not. So that's why I'm in support of it at this point, even though I hate myself for it. Nope, no clapping,
No
please.
clapping, no clapping.
Not allowed. But I do have concerns, and maybe the temporary use permit will give us a chance to address those concerns and see where it falls out. I would favor seeing permanent zoning in a more industrial area than having it right where the kids eat lunch every day from the high school. It's in your face. But again, I have to applaud the design of the facade. It is low key. You wouldn't really know it was a cannabis shop unless you actually read the sign. So I'm supportive of that aspect of it. The other one of my concerns coming in here was where are people going to smoke it? Because you can't smoke it in your hotel room. You can't smoke it in your B&B. You're not supposed to smoke it in a public park. So where are you going to smoke it? Locals can order pot. I've ordered pot online. It comes in a couple days. It's fine. You just have to be, you have to plan ahead. So, it's locals have access to it. So that's not really the issue. So to support a pot shop of this size, it's going to rely on tourism to drive it. So I'm just curious where we think tourists are going to smoke it, because I don't particularly like the smell of it when I'm not smoking it. When I go to the beach, it's just not the right place. So I'm just curious as to where that's going to happen, but I guess we'll see. And if in 3 years the whole place smells like skunk cabbage, then we can make another decision based on that.
I think the report actually does specify that the vast majority of people do smoke it at home. And because there are rules around, you can't smoke it in front of open doorways. You can't, Andrew, you probably know these rules better than me, where there's, I think the report addresses it, like where you can actually smoke cannabis.
Andrew Hansen, 2216 Lake Placid. Yeah. They're in the report. The studies over the last 3 years are that people are, taking their product and going home. With Ian's comment, I mean, though, I don't really have an answer because I can't tell you where people are going to smoke it. All I can tell you is that as a retailer and a store, we educate our customers as well. We say you can't go outside and light up, and you can't go to the park, and you can't do this. And we do educate as we send people on their way. And we don't encourage the original thought, I think, of these stores when they were coming around was that people were going to go and buy some pot, and then they're going to sit on the curb outside and roll a joint, and there's going to be a bunch of people hanging out smoking weed out front, which is 100% not the case. We've seen it all firsthand that people go to where they want to go to sit, relax, and smoke or eat or consume their cannabis however they're going to do it. So I can't answer your question other than we do our best to tell people where not to go.
I understand that. The issue is that this is a tourist town, and tourists are going to buy it there, and they have nowhere to smoke it other than outside in public. So that is a concern. In Amsterdam, they've banned the sale of cannabis to tourists. It's for locals only, and because they had such a problem with it. So, we could be looking at that same problem. So this is something, like if you want to continue with the temporary use permit after 3 years, it's something you're going to have to consider going forward as to who you're supplying and where they're smoking it, and reining it in if that need be.
Yeah, definitely. And this is off topic, but coming down the pipe now is the BC government is looking at authorized consumption rooms. So instead of having a bar, you're going to have a smoking room, which will be a whole other meeting for you guys.
Yeah, let's not go there. Thank you. In the report, it says District of Ucluelet Bylaw number 1187, 2016, prohibits smoking or vaping of cannabis in any part of a municipal park, such as Village Green, Wild Pacific Trail, Big Beach, Lighthouse Loop, etc., any restaurant, and within 8 meters of any opening of any building, including any door or window, and within 8 meters of customer service areas. So that's pretty clear.
It's pretty clear, but we don't have enforcement.
Might need another bylaw officer. All right, any further discussion? Chime in?
Yeah.
Councillor Anderson?
Everybody's talking. The only part that I would be trepidatious about, and again, you're obviously a big part of the community, Andrew, and you know, folks like Zane and everyone talking. It does instill a fair bit of confidence that you're doing the right thing. But just to put it out there for a temporary use. And you know, to see how things go. My only concern was the proximity to the new Village Green playground. But again, I guess I have to put hope and that people do the right thing and tourists do the right thing and you know but we'll be watching. You know. All right.
Great. Yes, I've known Mr. Hansen for, about 20 years. It's been a long, long time, and definitely respect him as a business person. And I think the temporary use permit avenue is a really great one to test this product out. And yeah, so we'll see how that goes. Any other further discussion? Okay, let's call the question. All in favor? Any opposed? And that carries. Thank you. All right, the May 16th, 2023 special council meeting is adjourned at 6:37. Thanks for coming, everyone.
I know temporary is